Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Judy and I love travel, history, and finding out how people live. This week we're setting forth from Venice on a cruise down the Adriatic. One thing you do when you travel solo, as I now mostly do, is figure out how to get between point A and point B. I've found there are always complications in changing locations, and catching a cruise ship is no exception. The first step, after you decide on your itinerary and book your ticket, is to actually get yourself to the cruise terminal. Sometimes it's pretty easy. The ship docks close to downtown. Other times you have to travel quite a distance, for instance from downtown Rome to Civitavecchia. And occasionally, and this has happened to me several times, you return after a long absence thinking you know where the terminal is, only to find out that they moved it. So you break out a map or Google Maps, you navigate, you find the ship. Get through all the formalities, get on board, find your cabin, and perhaps unpack. And after all of that, in my opinion, it is always time for an indulgence, known as a sail-away party. Grab a beverage of your choice, kick back, and sail away from Venice with me today on the Armchair Traveler. This 12-stop cruise was the final leg of an extremely ambitious 7-week-long trip that took me over big chunks of Italy, the Adriatic, the Mediterranean, Greece, Malta, Sicily, and finally back to Rome. My next stop was Split in Croatia to explore Emperor Diocletian's remarkable retirement villa and fortress. But first, I had to get myself and my suitcase to the Venice Cruise Passenger Terminal. Venice has 3 major docks and a love-hate relationship with big cruise ships. They love the passengers and the money that they bring in. They also like the docking fees. They also hate all the crowds, despite the money that they bring in. The oldest of the docks is called San Basilio, quite close to the Doge's Palace, and it's still in use, although it cannot handle big ships anymore. When my husband and I first visited here in 1980, we caught the MS Navarino right at this dock. The ship has long since been sent to the breakers and is probably scrap metal in a bridge somewhere, but the dock is still here, and it's still in use, although no longer for bigger cruise ships. I read during the worst of the pandemic, they actually shut it down and made it a vaccination and testing station. On the day I took this photo, the dock was hosting the MS Michelangelo, a river cruise ship. When we returned in 2009, the cruise ended in Venice, and our ship, the Island Princess, like all the bigger ships, had been exiled to what I thought of as the new Venice Cruise Passenger Terminal, which had actually opened in 1997, so it wasn't that new. We booked a post-cruise stay in the city, and transportation from the new dock to the hotel was included, so I didn't pay much attention to the complications of being a bit further from the action. For the trip we're making today, however, I did depart through the same Venice Cruise Passenger Terminal, now gussied up with an extremely handy public transportation option called a people mover. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a few minutes. However, as of this ride, the big ships have been exiled yet again, this time to an industrial port called Marghera on the mainland. It's difficult to get to, a royal pain in the neck for all involved, it doesn't have any facilities, and most of the big cruise ships have responded by dropping Venice as a port completely. If you're curious about Marghera, check out my WordPress blog. The link is in the description below. For now, however, let's pretend it's still 2018 and head out to the still shiny Venice Cruise Passenger Terminal. The Venetians sunk a considerable amount of money into outfitting the new port and added a modern passenger terminal as well as an automated people mover that will get visitors between the terminal area and the Piazzale Roma, which is quite close to the main train station. It was a very handy and clever addition. The people mover opened up in 2010 and cost them about 22 million euros. My hotel was right on the canal, so I had to backtrack a bit on foot to get to the terminus. As you can see on the map, if you pack light and you don't mind a longish walk, you could actually walk all the way there from the downtown area. Cruise passengers on these itinerary-heavy trips, however, tend to skew older, and although I'm reluctant to admit it, I fall in that category. So I opted for the people mover. The people mover sits quite a bit above the level of the sidewalk and features stairs that are quite obvious, but don't let the steps fool you. There's an elevator for us mortals with either heavy luggage or bad knees or bad backs or all of the above. The trains run fairly frequently, so day trippers can come into the city, enjoy its delights, and then return to the cruise ship either for a departure to their next stop or potentially for a longer stay. The view was pleasant, but the area where you exited was a little less pleasant. You come out on a huge parking lot, and as I recall, there wasn't any shade and no place to sit down. You just had to walk. Fortunately, once you get past that lot, you're in business. This is that parking lot I talked about. It's an unwelcome, mostly treeless area with plenty of whizzing cars and no place to sit down. I remember this terminal mostly because nothing negative about it sticks in my mind. This is quite a bit more than I can say for some ports I've transited. It was clean and efficient and did the job, and it was easy to get to. Let me introduce you to our ship for this cruise, Holland American's line Oosterdam. The ship is quite modern, built in 2003, and accommodates 1,900 guests in all sorts of increasingly expensive staterooms and suites. Your blogger was traveling solo, so I chose an inside cabin, which was quite comfortable, if lacking a view. I knew I was getting off at every single port, and if I wanted to look at the scenery, all I really had to do was go out on deck. Notice those lifeboats. They're there for more than just a ship's emergency. They double as tenders to ferry passengers between the ship and smaller ports where the ship cannot dock. On my cruise, we only used them once. I'll tell you the sad tale of how it nearly did me in when we get to Malta. Meanwhile, the next few photos are going to show you not the sail-away party, although there was one, but what you really go out on deck to see, the views. Maneuvering away from the dock, through the channel and out to the Adriatic is no small task for the ship, the captain, and the crew. The channel is a very busy waterway, as you can see from some of the photos that are going to follow, hosting not just my big cruise boat, but vaporettos, pleasure boats, car ferries, sailboats, harbor tour boats, river boats, even freighters and tugs. The bigger ships don't just wander around the channel. They always pick up a harbor pilot, a man or woman with specialized knowledge of that particular area. Sometimes the pilots board on the dock, but they always decamp via a pilot boat, which I'll show you in a minute. Watching them scuttle down a ladder to the relatively tiny bobbing boat is always interesting, but I can tell you it's not something I would want to do. I'll let you watch some of my sail-away photos accompanied by a bit of sail-away music now. Thank you for joining me on this visit to Venice's cruise passenger terminal. I am in hopes that by the time I return, it will have reopened again to larger ships. In any event, come back next week when our ship pulls into Split, Croatia to visit Emperor Hadrian's remarkable combination retirement villa and fortress with me on The Armchair Traveler.